You're listening to a new episode of The Brave Technologist, and this one features Angels Menendez, who's a cybersecurity and AI automation expert, currently at N8N, helping enterprises scale their AI-driven workflows and integrate intelligent automation into traditionally manual processes. With a deep background in threat intelligence, digital privacy, process orchestration, he brings a unique perspective on the evolving intersection of cybersecurity, automation, and responsible AI adoption. In this episode, we discussed ways that AI is changing the way companies think about automation, especially at the enterprise level, cybersecurity threats he's currently worried about, sentiment analysis at scale, how they're utilizing community and listening tools to help shape marketing strategies and drive growth, and how he thinks about unlocking creativity in right brain thinkers by leveraging emerging technologies like AI. And now for this week's episode of The Brave Technologist. Angel, welcome to The Brave Technologist. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing well. I've been looking forward to this. I appreciate you making the time to come on and share with our audience.
Likewise, likewise. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, why don't we set the table a little bit for everybody and kind of, do you mind sharing a little bit about what kind of first drew you into the intersection of kind of cybersecurity and AI?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As far as I have a pretty varied I have a pretty varied tech background. So I first got into technology and networking when I was like 7 years old. My father and our family moved from Puerto Rico, and originally there just wasn't a lot of economic opportunity out there in terms of jobs availability. So my family moved to Oklahoma, and my father started as a welder. And he, during the day, he'd go to a steel mill and work there. And I still very succinctly remember him coming home smelling of iron. And it's just something that just has never left me. But he started going to night school for IT and computers. This was like the early 90s.
Okay.
And it was still kind of like a new thing. And, people were kind of like, this computer stuff isn't going to go anywhere, And, but my father kind of got into it real early. Spanish was their first language. So he would bring home books like Networking for Dummies. And I love to read. I've always been a voracious reader. And so I would translate the books for him at the kitchen table. So like to kind of make it a little easier. So I was very young. I got into it. I thought I would be kind of the rebel, though. As I learned computer networking from him and from those books, I was like, I never want to do this. Like, I'm an artist at heart. I'm gonna make art. And so, as I got older, I got into web design, kind of like letting that be my creative outlet. So that's essentially kind of how I got into the tech world. I took a detour as a flight attendant for 8 years doing web design while being a flight attendant, which was, quite an experience. And then from there, as I was kind of flying around the world, I had my first child. And I was like, this flying thing is fun, but I don't think I can sustain this. And I had helped a friend of mine get a job in the cybersecurity industry maybe 20 years prior. It wasn't actually cybersecurity, it was IT, but he started like going up in the IT world. I see him, I think of him as my mentor. And so we would always sync up, and he would help me with my web design projects on the side. And one day he was like, I think from what I've seen, like you could do cybersecurity and engineering. He's like, have you considered it? And I'm like, I have, but like, I don't have like, a technical background in terms of like, an actual educational degree in this. So I'm like, do you think that like they'll be okay with that? And he's like, yeah, like let's talk through. You have a portfolio already. You have, these skills. We just need to make sure you understand Linux and kind of go into it from there. So I spent maybe like 6 months to a year working with him and just mentoring under him and learning a lot about Linux and, different, back end networking stuff that I had kind of learned earlier on, but I had never been able to apply.
Hmm.
And so I got my first job in cybersecurity working for a company called Threat Connect, which is where he was working at, working as a customer success engineer there. And I loved it. It was just so interesting. I mean, there's so much that you can do in that space in terms of growth. Like there's really, especially when I got into it about, I think 6 years now, there just wasn't a lot of automation. A lot of things were done manually. This is kind of before AI really kind of took off.
Hmm.
So one of the big issues that I was dealing with was noise. Like in cybersecurity, there's just a ton of noise in terms of like you'll get these huge IP data sets. And the goal is really to sift through them, looking for almost like breadcrumbs to see, if, a relevant attack was actually happening or not, on the customer's back end using tools like SIMs to essentially look through log monitoring and from there essentially extrapolate, yes, these IPs are responsible for that. Let's add this to a block list, put past that block list over to like network firewalls, and then ensure that, these IPs can't get through. And so that was kind of where I got my start. And it was funny because the same mentor, I just remember like being kind of frustrated with some of the tooling. And my mentor was like, I actually saw this tool on, on product. What was it? It was actually Hacker News. And he's like, it's called N8N. Have you heard of it? And I'm like, no, I want to take a look. So he sent me the link and I fell in love. I was just like, this is so cool. Like I was able to self-host, and coming from a web design background, I had early on learned that you can make money not just in the consulting space, but in the hosting space. If you can get that recurring revenue, that's even better. So one of the things that I had done in the web design space is I built WordPress websites, and those WordPress websites I would then host. So I would make money on the design and I would make money on the hosting, which was very nice to have like a recurring income.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking when I saw N8N for the first time, like, oh my God, this is like the WordPress of automation. So I was able to kind of internally at that cybersecurity firm I was working at, build like my first real like in production workflow, which it ended up saving the company. I think it was like 50 man hours per customer, per customer success manager per month. And
Wow.
there was like, my goodness, I think there was like 15 to 20 of us in the customer success side. So the amount of hours it saved was huge. And I think like 4 years later, I was working for another cybersecurity firm, and we purchased that product, Threat Connect, and they sent us the N8N link. And I'm like, I built this. I built this. I've been here years, but they're still using it. This is great. I left a legacy,
That's
So
awesome. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it was very, very cool. So the way this all kind of connects back to AI. At my most recent organization in cybersecurity, I was working at Palo Alto Networks, kind of doing something similar. So I jumped around, going from a cybersecurity firm to firm, and I was working at Palo Alto Networks, and that was when AI, ChatGPT kind of was first released, and I was just obsessed. I was like trying to find ways to hack it. And because I had the ability to work on the API side with N8N in such a visual, easy to access way, early on, I was playing with the system prompts and trying to build ways to get around like a lot of the monitoring and tooling that they have in place on the Chat GPT interface in order to like see what I could just do with it. Like just what
Hmm.
can I do? What can I play? What can I generate with this? Um, and so because I was also very involved in the N8N, even though I didn't work there, I spent a lot of time in the community forums. Like
Hmm.
essentially what I would do, I had like a little trick. I would essentially answer a lot of the easy questions to force the employees to answer my complicated questions. I'd be like, you owe me now. I've answered like 40 questions. Get to work. So it worked out great. But then I kind of made a name for myself that way. And one of the marketing heads reached out to me while I was working at Palo Alto, saying, "Hey, would you be interested in working for us?" Cybersecurity is kind of a big industry for using low code automation tools, again, to reduce noise.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how they reached out. I'm so excited at the opportunity, again, having like built a lot of my own personal automations at home using N8N. It was a really easy kind of shift in I don't want to say careers because it was very similar career wise, but more like a shift in jobs, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the first ways that like I was able to kind of have an impact is seeing just how powerful AI can be in reducing noise. So like again, kind of in cybersecurity, one of the main issues again is like sifting through mountains of noise and being able to essentially isolate noise that like essentially is relevant to the situation and noise that is just background noise that we want to eliminate and go from there. So basically one of my goals was like, how can we utilize these tools, this platform to make that easier? So I had built quite a few cybersecurity workflows that we published on our gallery. One of the ones that I'm most proud of was actually not noise reduction, but automated SIM classification of alerts. So that's another big one is like in cybersecurity, typically you'll kind of have different layers of workers. So one of the early layers is analysts. You'll have analysts where data comes in, they analyze the data, and from there, kind of escalate it, kind of go from there. The problem is that like many analysts, not all, of course, but there are many analysts that are very new to the industry. Cybersecurity itself is very kind of young, and so it makes it difficult for onboarding new analysts to have to like teach them the basics of like the industry, teach them like, for example, something like MITRE ATT&CK, which is like a catalog of different hacking attempts and triage and how to like essentially, identify whether this noise that's coming in is really a hacking attempt or not. And so one of the early builds that I built in N8N and released a video of was essentially a way to connect MITRE ATT&CK to your AI using a vector store. So essentially taking that catalog of information, vectorizing it, and then attaching it to your AI agent so that it can use that to essentially get relevant context in terms of like, for example, you could connect it to a SIM and those alerts first go through that AI agent. It identifies, what kind of attack it could be. It tags it with different tactics and procedures. And from there, it essentially assigns it, to an analyst via a tool like Jira, for example. And so those kinds of intersections for me are really interesting because it allows, it doesn't exactly take away jobs so much as it helps give newer workers to an industry kind of a more essentially it equalizes the playing field by giving them more context to be able to do their job more effectively. So that to me was kind of where that intersection came from. And a lot of what I do now is mostly kind of an intersection of the marketing side as well as IT ops and cybersecurity, essentially helping our internal teams better understand, where processes can be improved, as well as, talking with some of our customers, both, sales and customer success, in helping them implement existing workflows to be able to automate some of those more tedious, cybersecurity and automation related tasks. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but does that
no. That's why you're here, man. I think this is great. Like, first off, I think it is very underrated. The path of entry from web designing and development into the security world, and I feel like security is one of those areas where having, there's so many things that happen like at the front end level, and there's so many facets to it that, I want the audience to understand, like, you don't have to go get a comp sci degree to like get into security. Like you see how much, wreckage there is in everyday web development and seeing where you can kind of patch the holes there. But more to the point though, I think it's a really, really cool point you made about, how AI and agents can help you kind of like sift through the noise. Are from the threat side, like, what are you worried about, or like, because there's so much noise, like in general around AI and like doomerism and stuff like that. But like from a practical security perspective, like, what are you worried about, or what are the new and emerging threats that you hadn't had to really face before, that you're having to think about more now than in the past?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say so. Lack of understanding of the tooling in general, I think,
Hmm.
is kind of a big issue. I feel like we have these powerful AI tools at our disposal, but I feel like many people in the industry don't quite know how they work. They're kind of like a black box,
Hmm.
and I think that if you don't fully understand things as simple as like file structure and file management, like you have to kind of start at the bottom and work your way up. If you kind of start with AI, it makes it very difficult to have an understanding of just how useful it can be. So
Hmm.
I think I would say that like in a situation like that, the biggest like kind of emerging things that I'm seeing on my end is kind of inexperience coupled with a lot of responsibility and power, and not knowing exactly how to implement some of these tools, especially on the AI side, in order to essentially maximize the kind of like maximize the output, but also ensure that the data that is being sent to some of these models is protected or
Hmm.
not exposed in
Hmm.
many ways. So like one of the things that I would see kind of early on is like passing text or URLs directly to services like what's one of the big ones here? I might have to look it up. Um, oh my gosh, it's been a while. It's on the tip of oh gosh, virus total. It's been a long day. But like essentially not encoding some of the data before sending it, to services like virus total. And unfortunately, like that exposes a lot of this data because some of these databases are, public essentially.
Hmm.
And some of those similar issues kind of have transferred their way into AI in terms of like, you don't control some of these models, like you don't control like Chat GPT or OpenAI's models, and you need to be very careful about what you're sending into these models and be careful that they're not being used as part of the larger training data sets.
Hmm.
So, being able to like build around some of those security vulnerabilities, I guess you could think of it as, like, it's very important. But again, it kind of comes back to having kind of a baseline understanding of what is happening on the back end, on the API side, on the kind of the data side, and making sure that like you understand kind of from beginning to end where your data is currently living, where it's going. Is it on the cloud? Is it local? Where are these models living? Like, are you using a cloud model? Are you running something locally like Olama? And essentially being able to decide what the best tool for the job is.
Hmm.
Sometimes you do want to use, tools like OpenAI, but there's many times when you want to self-host and you want to run
Hmm.
these models locally. That's one of, I think, the benefits of using N8N is, and one of the reasons I got so excited is, I want to be as privacy focused as I can. And I hate to expose data when I don't have to. So if I can control the infrastructure, I feel a lot safer in terms of like, and you're still kind of exposing yourself. Now you have to be the network admin. You have to be the, your own CISO in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you have a firm understanding of like, exposure in terms of like what, ports you're exposing, what's open to the internet, what's not, air gapping, things like that, you can really protect yourself in ways that you normally couldn't do if you didn't self-host. And so, yeah, so I think, does that kind of answer the question in
Yeah, yeah,
terms
no,
of
I think,
answering?
it kind of got me thinking about another one specific to N8N too. Like,
Mhm.
you touched on it a little bit in your first answer, but like, can you break down a little bit what N8N does, like for customers and then for the end user too? Like, it might help
Yeah,
illustrate a little bit. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, great question. So, N8N is an automation workflow platform that allows you to essentially build out. I like to think of it as code with blocks in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. Like, this is something that my children, they when you ask them like, "What do you do, Dad?" Like their answer is like, "Well, Dad plays with blocks all day." Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
they're 3 and 6, so they kind of simplify it a little bit. But in many ways, what you're doing is you're abstracting away a lot of coding to kind of this diagramming kind of flow building. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about the platform because for example, when I worked at Palo Alto Networks, we had usually when we were building out flows for our customers, it would take two employees to do it. So you would have your customer success architect, which would come up with the general idea, and they would have a very good understanding of all the different APIs involved. They would create a document or a diagram to essentially show what steps would need to be taken. And that would become our blueprint that then would be handed down to us in the engineering side to essentially deploy the actual code, usually
Mhm.
Python or something like that internally. Um, and one of the benefits of N8N is that you can reduce that down to one step because you're doing both the diagramming and the coding in that same step, which I think has seen a big rise in the prevalence of like vibe coding in
Yeah.
terms of like just sitting down and like building out these complex flows because you're able to see and to kind of the name, to allude to the name, like the blocks are called nodes. So you're able to see the inputs and outputs kind of
Mhm.
within those nodes. And being able to do that gives you this very linear approach to coding that you can kind of store in your head in a visual way. And one of the things that separates N8N from companies like Make or Zapier is the ability to essentially self-host and own your own
Mhm.
code. So kind of going back to that WordPress analogy, being able to own your own code is huge because in many ways, like in this day and age, it's very easy for the companies that control the cloud to control the cost. And
Mhm.
many times, like it's arbitrary and it could be at a whim. And you may not like a price increase, but you just got to suck it up. And for small business owners or medium-sized business owners, those kinds of costs add up very quickly, and it becomes very difficult to either scale or to have an idea of what your expenses are at a given at any given time because you're not able to set a stable cost, right? And by being able to self-host, you're basically, you need to invest the knowledge on how to deploy, but at the same time, you lower your cost to almost the cost of the electricity of running the server.
Mhm.
And that allows you to keep your pricing very stable. It allows you to own your own code in terms of like, one of the things that I like about N8N is that the code is stored as JSON. So you can save that, anywhere. You can, copy and paste it into your canvas and you can just deploy as you go. So in a nutshell, the platform itself is about automation, but the way that you host it, I think, is one of the biggest kind of differences between us and our competitors. And in addition to that, the UI is very, very intuitive. So everything
Mhm.
is kind of, inputs and outputs. The name of the company itself, the N8N, is short for node domation. So it's kind of like automation, but with nodes.
Mhm.
And the N8N, I think, comes from, I think, Kubernetes, kind of that K8s or K8s, kind of breakdown. So it's kind of similar in that way, and it's kind of stuck, but it's kind of given us this ability to give customers a choice in terms of like,
Mhm.
how do you want to deploy this? Do you want to go with our cloud where we manage the infrastructure and kind of take that stress off of you? Or, are you a cybersecurity firm that has a lot of limitations in how you can host? Like, do you want to self-host? Do you have a lot of PII flowing through your automations? Do you need to like air gap that and just have that running locally? You can do that, so I feel very, very privileged to be able to work for an organization like that has so much flexibility, and I think that's what's led to some of our like massive growth that we've been experiencing lately.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think too, toward the end there, you brought up a really good point on the self-hosting piece that it's something we kind of deal with at Brave a lot, where we think about, first party relationships and third parties. And, it seems like the ability for a business to self-host easily, with the way that data provenance and and user information flows and breaches and all that, I feel personally like one of the things I'm really kind of concerned about right now is just that there's this balance of like convenience with these prompts, and it almost like just it's disarming, right? Like for the user, where you just stop thinking about certain barriers that you naturally put up with giving information away, and you really like I thought ad tech was bad. Like, you don't know where these models are sending anything, And so
Oh
I
yeah.
really love that. It was something we dealt with a lot where we were, especially when we brought like advertising, that was privacy preserving to the fold when we would talk to customers and be like, hey, like maybe there's like one or two things where you can actually self host it and have it work like a Google Analytics, but it's, right. But on the AI side, like it seems like there aren't really a ton of, you either hear people talk about local models and stuff like that, or but not a lot about the self-hosting. So it seems like really interesting, like from a user first perspective on things as an option for businesses. So that's super cool to hear. Are there a lot of customers that are self-hosting right now? Is that kind of like a major thing you guys try to do, or is it just kind of like pretty new and people are just kind of digging into it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I need to look into. I know we have a lot of like internal metrics on that, but yeah, I'd say a very large majority of our customers do self-host. I think it's almost like a gateway drug in many ways. Like you start running it at home for personal use, and then you start seeing the power of it, and
Mhm.
then you go to work and all of a sudden you start seeing like flows in your head or in your dreams, and you're like, man, I'm doing this manual process at work that I could like automate using N8N. And then you start talking to your internal teams and you start deciding on infrastructure. And if your organization doesn't have like a robust DevOps team to be able to like self-host, then you kind of then graduate to the next level, which is like, hey, well, then let's move into N8N's cloud and let's use their own cloud product in order to like power this. But what I found is that like in terms of like experimentation and MVPs, most like serious automators will start with self-hosting and then kind of work their way up as they need to. And I'd have to look internally to see, what the split is between, hosted and non-hosted clients, but it is definitely a non-trivial part of our organization's community in terms
No, it's
of like
awesome.
infrastructure.
I mean, even that bit is impactful, right? Like because sometimes people would think about it like, oh, it's just like something out of my garage or something. Where you're like, okay, it's like a science project versus like something that like serious businesses are using. So it's super cool to hear that. I mean, there's like. It also seems like right now, compared to other types of emerging tech, like AI is one of those things where there's so much hype, and you've got like Fortune 2000 companies, like executive teams, kind of pushing mandates across the organizations for businesses that are established but haven't done AI to like put AI everywhere. And then
Yeah.
you've got also on the other end, like this flood of tooling and new models and different types of models that are doing different types of things. Like, how do you balance that, like, lack of market fit with like the pace and tempo of like new entrants and all that you have to learn there with like providing good security for users and for businesses? Like, what's the are there any secrets that you have on that front, or tips that the audience might, a lot of them might be kind of facing these issues, and it might be interesting for them to hear from your point of view kind of how you're balancing all that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, as far as tips and tricks, that's a tough one. Like, again, I think it comes back to the user's own knowledge of, data management in many ways and
Mhm.
understanding like what surfaces is this data touching? Is this touching like a remote server? Is this touching an internal server? I will say that internally at N8N, one of the focuses and one of the ways that the platform is powerful and kind of one of the differences between us and many of our competitors is our focus on standards.
Mhm.
Being able to essentially not build, custom kind of bespoke, connections, like using these standards to let users decide what they want to do. Like for our AI agents, for example, I think one of the reasons that we were very successful earlier on is not, tying ourselves to one specific AI agent or model or tool, but using standards to allow for the integration of just about any, AI model or large language model to be integrated into your workflows. And because we were kind of an automation first company to begin with, we already dealt with a lot of standards in terms of, like, for example, using JSON for just about everything, like internally, from data management to workflow storage, using things like curl for API connections, being able to like go to just about any API documentation page, copy the curl request and import that into the HTTP request tool makes it like a Swiss Army knife, essentially. So I'd say like being able to, I'd say the answer here is by focusing on standards and not so much on, just like a one-off solution, we're able to kind of cater to a larger audience. And what we found is that audience, for the most part, tends to know what they need and want. And it's mostly just giving them that availability to be able to integrate using, whatever standard works best for them, to be able to deploy either the AI models or their automations or, whichever one works best for them, and not worrying too much about, having the perfect answer. It's more just like finding the best standard that goes with the platform. Does that kind of answer?
No, it's a great point. I think, like focusing on standards is like key, and kind of on that note too, like how I'm personally haven't dug as far into this as I probably should have, but like, how are you seeing kind of standards bodies adapting to this wave of AI? Just because, it seems like standards bodies move kind of slow, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of people and a lot of a big internet, right? Like, and or big web, I mean, and, like, things need to move a little slower there. Like, from your take as somebody that's kind of focusing on standards, is it more about kind of grasping existing standards, or like, are you seeing a lot of inputs from folks around how, standards can not adapt, but new standards can kind of be brought to like adapt to where this AI world is going? Like, super curious to hear your take on it.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I almost think of us as like, as an organization, as having like kind of two different kind of focuses, right? And they've just converged very naturally. Like the automation side and the AI side have converged into what the product is today. So to answer your question, what I've seen is that the standards are being built by the biggest players. So like you'll have like OpenAI, for example, like early on built kind of a standard on how model communication kind of takes place. And we're able to reuse that standard across many different large language models. You can actually integrate some models that we don't have native support for into N8N by utilizing those standards that kind of OpenAI pioneered. So what I would say is kind of a mix. Like for kind of like the automation side, there's so many standards that have paved the way for what we're seeing now in terms of the AI side. But at the same time, on the AI side, we're seeing, because it's kind of like the Wild West, we're seeing them create these new standards. They kind of duke it out, and the easiest standard to integrate ends up winning, and kind of starts moving forward. We're seeing that kind of, I think, on the Anthropic side with MCP as well. Like being able to like deploy these standards allows for much faster builds, much faster integrations. So again, like I think that has allowed us as an organization to grow by kind of piggybacking on these standards. But at the same time, we have to be very picky in terms of like what standards we're going to go with, because a standard that, might be hot and in fashion today might just be a bubble,
Right,
and then
right.
you have to
Totally.
like,
Yeah.
then where are you? You have to like reverse track, and you want to avoid that where you can. So I'd say like it's really a mix. Like it's knowing, what has worked in the past and looking at these emerging trends and trying to forecast for the future and trying to build. So one of the things we do internally and the big projects that we're working on internally and that I'm a part of is sentiment analysis on a bulk scale. Like being able, like we have access to all this data online from, places like Reddit or Twitter, or rather I should say X, right? All of these like social media companies have created this fire hose of sentiment that is just ripe to be analyzed. So by using N8N's ability to scrape and pull and merge tools together, we can build internal tools to try to get a pulse on, what the internet's talking about, what the internet's excited about. And from there, be able to decide, okay, we're seeing a lot of noise and it's sustained over, X number of months in this particular area. This is probably where our product team should focus on. This is where we should move forward in. And I think so far that has been a good way. That has been, how do I phrase this? I feel like that has been part of our success, has been to utilize the community that already exists around our product and all these AI products out there, listening to them, which, in the past without AI would have been very difficult. It would have been I can only imagine the flows and builds to try to standardize the output. So many if checks, to see if, keywords exist. Now we can really kind of boil down whole conversations down to excitement or, fear, apprehension, or these tags that allow us to then, move forward in a way that builds more confidence and feels more data driven. But you still have to apply a lot of knowledge in terms of what channels are we listening to? Why are we listening to these channels? Are these channels a reflection of the greater, community, or are they, hubs for a bubble, to burst, you have to be very careful. But again, I think what AI has done is it's given us the ability to listen to our community at scale. And then from there, make data-driven decisions, which I think is one of the things I'm most proud of with N8N is we try to make as many decisions as we can based on data, as opposed to feelings or emotions or I've worked at some organizations in the past where product features were driven by, the least common denominator, which is how much money are we going to get by implementing this feature or tool. And at N8N, what I've seen, because so much of our success has been driven by our community, what we have learned, early on is by listening to that community, we can keep growing because the community is very vocal. They'll tell you what they want, And so by listening, I feel like we're able to kind of outpace our competitors in terms of hey, this might be a fad right now, but this is what our community is saying. Let's go down this path, as opposed to hey, this one organization is going to pay big bucks for this one feature. We're going to build entire, workflows around that. Instead, it's what can we do to help the greatest number of people? So does that kind of answer
No,
that?
that's fantastic. I mean, it's a lot of us listening into a mirror, for what we do too. I mean, because, I think the community element is huge, right? Especially with building software and kind of open software. It's if you're not listening to those people, you're really just kind of running with blindfold on, basically, because they're going to be with you when you're in ups and downs, and there's that kind of volunteer element of contribution that the communities have in software development that you don't see. You see it in other places, but it's not a common thread in the commercial space at all. And so it's super cool to hear that, and I kind of keep hearing this my mind is kind of going to this place as we're talking here too, that I think is really interesting, where there's so much fear from people all over the place, right? You hear people talking, oh, you can have a 10x coder, or AI is going to do all of the work for us, or even my wife's a product marketer, right? And they all were using prompts super early, and they just kind of organically did it, and they're wow. But you've got this fear around, kind of the plow and the tractor, kind of, how is this going to impact here? But what I'm hearing with what you're telling me in almost every different pillar of this discussion is look, it seems like N8N is kind of one of those things where if you're not going to get rid of the engineer or the coder or the architect, you're really going to give them building blocks to do really cool things, and their job's not going to go away. It's just going to change because so much of it doesn't have to be manual anymore. Is it it seems like you guys are kind of helping to build some of the power tools that aren't just the robot taking over everything, but really what's the edge that we're going to get? Because that's what I just keep hearing, because so much, even on that last point, right? With community, where we have people that are out there kind of, it's almost like you've got layers that information filters up through, and trust and all of that. And like, it seems like what you guys are doing is kind of helping to like optimize that too, like, and rate and get quality as fast as possible. Like, I don't know, I don't know where it's going with that, but like, I think, looking out too, like, you guys might be doing the Lego blocks now. Where do you see this going over the next 5 years or so? Like, in your mind, like,
Yeah.
for AI and impact and tooling and stuff.
That's a great question. I want to build on a point that you just
Yeah, yeah, sure,
mentioned.
please do.
I feel like this isn't the first time this has happened. Like in different spaces, right? Like I feel like early on, one of the big fears when I was in web design was, oh my gosh, we have Wix now. We have all of
Yeah.
the tools that are going to put web developers out of business, because why would you pay someone so much money when you can just go on Wix and throw together, a 5-page website with just a few clicks, you know?
Hmm.
And what I learned is that I think it comes down to language. Like in terms of, it's very difficult for an end user to communicate to an AI, to a web design website, like exactly what they want, because they don't know what questions to ask. And
Hmm.
so I think what's happening is kind of similar to what happened kind of in the Wix space is, yes, some of kind of the low effort, low hanging fruit has been kind of trimmed off, but the web developers kind of that understood the power and were able to utilize tools like Wix or WordPress were able to see, okay, this is just another tool in my tool belt. If
Hmm.
I'm building a brochure website for a family friend, like I can build something in Wix in 5 minutes and get them off my back much faster than if it's a paid customer that needs, user management and CMS or CRM capabilities. At that point, I'll use WordPress. And instead of like getting angry at an emergent technology, you see, how can I add this to my tool set? And I feel like that's
Hmm.
exactly what's happening with N8N. It's essentially AI is yet another node, in our tool set, right? It's
Yeah.
the company is still automation first. It's still essentially, how can we reduce the pain points that we're experiencing? And a big part of my job, I work with enterprises to help ensure that they can scale effectively. And a big part of that is not taking away jobs. A big part of that is reducing friction, because in larger organizations, what we're seeing is siloing effect of teams being entrenched in one tool, one platform, one website to do their work, but they don't have coherent systems to offload that data that they have been massaging or working on to the next department. So you might have
Hmm.
sales using Salesforce, and then you'll have, customer success using their CRM, and then from there you'll have the marketing team using Notion. And it's like, okay, who's going to step back, look at these tools not as the end all be all, because some of these departments are so entrenched that that's their entire world, but how do the APIs and backends allow the data from the Salesforce side to then push a webhook into the customer success side? So you have a data packet with all the information needed to push it into the CRM. And then how do we feed that data from the CRM as graphs and charts for the Notion side, in terms of the marketing, to then say, hey, this is the patterns we're detecting across our customers. How can we market more effectively to them?
Hmm.
So not to kind of go on a tangent, but to
No,
answer
no,
your
this is great.
question, essentially, like where I see N8N going is kind of similarly utilizing AI as yet another tool in the tool belt, right? There are many, I think, like automation engineers that essentially are going to continue to use the visualization and building, one node at a time, because they think in that linear path. But
Hmm.
some of the stuff that we're working on internally is the ability to generate workflows from a prompt. So we're able to type in, I need to build a workflow that connects, for example, Salesforce to this, bespoke CRM that we've built that's headless, to essentially, transfer the data seamlessly between this and that, right? And you type that in, you hit enter, the AI takes that, It looks at the documentation for all of our nodes. It takes, it looks at all the templates that have been, submitted via our own community, and using those patterns that it's really, that's, I think where AI is really the most powerful, is finding these patterns that we can't really see as well, merging those into an output that is a fully finished workflow. And then, with a few clicks, you have an output, you have a bunch of nodes all put together. But I think the difference is, the problem with AI currently, in my opinion, is that it's still a black box. You can do some amazing things with AI. You can have it build a Python code that will do all of what, N8N is doing in a particular flow. The problem is, how are you going to debug that when it starts, when there's a change, for example, in the backend API that it's connected to? Like, you need to make sure at that point that you either understand the API to fix it yourself. You need to be able to communicate. And that's where it comes back to asking the right questions, knowing what questions to ask. It's like, hey, the API has changed. Like, this has been deprecated. We need to support a different endpoint. This is like, how the data needs to be structured to be able to support it. How do you communicate that to the AI? And I think that is where N8N shines, because it takes away that black box effect. You're not just talking to raw code. You're able to see the data flowing through the blocks and seeing the input and output of each, and being able to say, with just a little bit of work, saying, oh my gosh, here's the error. The problem is the API. We just need to tweak, this here. Boom, we can fix it, and now we're back in production. So I think, like, the ability to visualize, and I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day about this, and I think that N8N is uniquely positioned to allow creatives to code. And I think that you have kind of this right brain, left brain split, right? So you might have your left brain engineers, which are very, logic driven and can code, but don't have the imagination to come up with flows without having an architect step in and say, hey, this is what we need. Can you build it out? Instead, you're taking the creatives that have all the ideas, but none of the technical expertise, and we're empowering them to essentially say, hey, here are the tools. This is what the engineers are using on the back end, abstracted away to a simple input and output. Go crazy. What can you build with this? And I think that unlocking the creativity of those of us that are more right-brained gives this like superpower to allow users to be able to build stuff that we've never seen before. Like building, like, granted, some of those things aren't always the most optimal, or many times you'll use AI in ways that you're just like, you could use a math function for that. You don't need an AI doing math. Like, there's but it works, at least, for the MVP, hopefully. And I think unleashing that creativity is really important, because yes, I think that, AI is going to probably take away kind of the low hanging fruit, but it's going to give these new superpowers to this whole new segment of users that I think is going to be a net positive effect in terms of creativity, in terms of output, in terms of giving solutions that weren't really either possible before or able to be imagined before. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think it's really frames it up well. And we've been super generous with your time, Angel, too. I mean, where can people find your work, or reach out, or see what you're posting or talking about online? If you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you can find me on most of the socials under DJ Angelic. And I'm not a DJ per se. Typically, DJs, I think, is disc jockey. I consider myself a digital jockey. I like to think that, I know how to play the internet waves,
Awesome.
And so you can find me on like Twitter at twitter.com/ x.com/
I'll be forever Twittering myself. It's totally fine.
X.com/ DJ Angelic. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. I think it's under linkedin.com/ Angel G Menendez. That's a great way to reach out to me and connect and like ask questions. And mostly on our YouTube page on N8N, like a lot of what I do is I work with my colleague Max to build content to help. In my case, my goal is to build content to help enterprises and to help kind of make their lives a little easier. And Max works more on the kind of the larger community and kind of the more creative ideas. So we work together to try to create content that is entertaining and hopefully educational.
That's awesome. Awesome, man. Well, Angel, I really appreciate you taking the time. Love to have you back to check back in on how things are going. And thanks for coming by today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Brave Technologist podcast. To never miss an episode, make sure you hit follow in your podcast app. If you haven't already made the switch to the Brave browser, you can download it for free today at brave.com and start using Brave Search, which enables you to search the web privately. Brave also shields you from the ads, trackers, and other creepy stuff following you across the web.